So, Eddie, welcome to Gnostic Media Research and Publishing's podcast number 36. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be here. And like I said earlier, considering I have to turn myself in for 10 years imprisonment here in about 3 weeks, I guess everything's going pretty well.
Well, what can you say about your background and who is Eddy Lepp? And let's start off, let's just get to know who you are.
I'm the past national director for the American Medical Marijuana Association. I was the first person arrested, tried, and acquitted under Proposition 215. I'm the minister and head of the multi-denominational ministry for cannabis and Rastafari, the largest single bust in the history of the DEA, and the largest medical marijuana bust in the history of the world. I'm past High Times Freedom Fighter of the Year, and I've been honored, 10 or 15 times internationally for my activist work. I pretty much dedicated my life to standing up for rights that are being stripped away from people, whoever the people are, whatever the rights are. But I'm pretty well known for being a pot activist, although I tend to talk about hemp a whole lot more than I talk about marijuana.
Talk a little bit about, if you wouldn't mind, your case and what transpired in 2004.
Well, in a nutshell, basically, the feds came in 2002 and raided the gardens, and no one was arrested or anything. And then in 2003, they didn't bother us at all. And then in 2004, we planted again. And they came in and raided us, and of course I was arrested. Every year for 7 or 8 years now, we've sent all of the local authorities, including the governor and the attorney general, the last couple of years, letters telling them what we were doing, where we were going, giving exact legal descriptions, everything.
You're cutting out a little bit there.
It's my call interrupt. But we basically, did everything in the world that we could to be legal and sent them these letters saying, hey, if we're not legal, please tell us so that we can correct this. We don't want problems. And none of the letters was ever answered by the sheriff, the district attorney, the attorney general, the governor. No one ever answered the letters. So we assumed what we were doing was completely legal because when they had the opportunity to tell us it wasn't, no one said a word.
So... Go ahead.
Go right ahead.
Well, in 2004, I don't remember the exact date, but Jack
I
Harris.
believe it was August 18th.
Okay, well then it was August 17th that I was up at your place with Jack Harris, and we had stayed a couple of days up there with you, and met a lot of. Actually, I think that was probably the first time or maybe the second time I went up to your place. And, got to meet everybody and see what you were doing there. And, you certainly weren't hiding anything. That's for certain. And, you had your crop growing right alongside the highway and in sight of everyone, so it's not like you were hiding things off in the redwoods or anything like that.
Well, we had hoped that by doing it right out in the open, that they would understand that we were trying to be very honest and very open and allow everybody to see everything so that there wouldn't be questions. Sadly, they interpreted it as us trying to shove it in their face and, go yada yada. And that wasn't the case at all. All we were trying to do through the ministry was help sick and dying people that with valid California recommendations, we allowed them to plant on our property, the ministry's property.
Can you talk a little bit about how you had your arrangement set up so that people can understand how you operated?
Basically what it was if you had a valid recommendation, you could get, normally it was around 6 to 10 plants, but, there were some exceptions where we allowed more than that, depending on their medical needs and what their doctors recommended. And there were about 2,500 to 3,000 people involved in the field, and none of that evidence was allowed into court. So it made it real difficult to get the case, any justice in the case. I went to Vietnam many years ago and offered up my life for this country based on, baseball, hot dog, apple pie, and mom, And I realize now that, it's not the way that we were raised to believe when I was a young man. I was supposed to get a fair and impartial trial in front of a jury of my peers and by a fair and impartial judge, and I didn't get any of that. What little truth was allowed into the hearing, the judge told the jury they had to discount and could not use in my defense. So there went the truth and whole truth and nothing but the truth in the trial. The prosecution rested their case several times and said they were done with their motions. And the judge on her own went ahead and proceeded with the proceedings, even though we had them beat. So I was prosecuted by the prosecution. And, it's just a real fallacy to think that this was any kind of justice.
You there?
Yeah, I'm right here. I just was telling my daughter goodbye.
Well, what have you tried? Well, talk about they acquitted you on one or some of the charges, didn't they?
Well, they dropped 4 of the 6 charges, and then the 2 charges that they maintained, like I say, we actually beat them on the motions part of it, but the judge continued the trial. In other words, in the first instance, they threw out all of the warrants. So that should have been the end of the trial right there. Well, the judge said, after telling everyone that she would not allow them to come in and would not allow them to introduce the open field philosophy because they'd never mentioned it in 2.5 years, she turned around and not only let them bring it in, but she then used that as the reason to have the trial.
What is the open field philosophy?
Their open field thing is that they said they could see it from the road and therefore they didn't need a search warrant. And she allowed that after saying she wouldn't. Then we made our motion for the religious defense under the Religious Freedoms Restoration Act, and she came out and spent 15 minutes telling us how great we had done and 10 minutes telling the prosecution how badly they had screwed up. My attorney and I are both ready to jump up in the air with joy, and she turns around and says, but because there was so many plants, it was possible that it would be diverted for non-secular reasons, we're going to have the trial. And my attorney jumped right up and said, well, Your Honor, the UDV decision stated clearly that diversion is always a possibility and therefore in and of itself cannot be the reason to continue the prosecution. And she just laughed and said that's a matter for the appellate court and went ahead and had the trial. So do I feel that I was treated fairly by the judicial system? Not at all. Do I feel that I was singled out by our political system? Yes, I do.
What can you say about your appeal now?
Well, I'm out right now until the 6th of July when I self-surrender in Lompoc. And my attorney called me today and told me that if I ask for bail pending appeal, that they will take me into custody immediately. So I can't even ask for bail pending appeal. And that's, really kind of chicken shit. They put you in a position where you can't even have an opportunity to stay out on bail. I mean, I've been no problem to these people in 7 years. And why they feel they have to put me in prison now, I really don't know. Every report they've gotten from every probation person or from every pretrial guy, all of it all says the same thing. There was no victim. He's not a threat to anybody. He's not a threat to himself, and he's not doing anything to harm society, and he's not a threat to us. So, it's hard to understand why they're doing it the way they're doing it, but I don't have any control over what they do, so I'm kind of at their mercy.